So let's go ahead and get started. I think most of the folks that are joining the webinar are with us. Again, I want to welcome you to today's IWCS webinar event. I know that we have attendees from all over the world, so good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and we appreciate you spending your time, particularly in the off hours, to join us today. My name is Dave Cadu, and I am the CEO Director of IWCS. I'm very honored to work with you each and every year to participate in IWCS, and we have a very strong event this year. This webinar series is very popular. We conduct them each month, and this particular session is hosted by Dow, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of good information out of this. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that as an attendee, you're part of a larger audience, and during the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. And again, as a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We encourage you to submit any questions that you have in writing at any time during the presentation. Use the chat panel on the right of your screen. After typing your questions in the space at the bottom, hit the send button, and your questions will be addressed, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to enter your questions at any time during the presentation. Our IWCS webinar series events today on industry trends is hosted by Dow, a partner level sponsor of the IWCS Cable and Connectivity Industry Forum. Today we welcome Dr. Rennisha Wickham and Dr. Paul Burgundy and Lauren Boss from Dow. Rennisha, Paul, and Lauren will be presenting Dow's perspectives on the future of sustainable solutions for enhanced connectivity. We're all interested in that topic, and we all are trying to figure out what is the best and most appropriate options for a sustainable future. IWCS is offering this new series of webinars on important trends and technologies from the perspectives of our supply chain technology leaders and sponsors for IWCS. Today, you will learn about the market trends for power and telecommunication networks that are accelerating the demand for cable solutions. While the global demand for energy and enhanced connectivity continue to rise with population growth, so does the need for worldwide carbon reduction targets and more sustainable solutions. So how can we work together as an industry to achieve these goals? Rennisha Wickham is the North American Customer Manager for Wire and Cable at Dow. Rennisha is accountable for cultivating strategic partnerships through innovation and collaboration across the value chain. She focuses on supporting the growth of specialty plastics in competitive energy and infrastructure markets while delivering a valuable customer experience. As an inclusion and diversity champion, Rennisha also drives a global inclusion culture across Dow's packaging and specialty plastics business, and empowers her internal and external partners to cultivate a diverse community of critical thinkers that can solve the world's most challenging problems. Rennisha recognizes the tremendous role that mentorship has played in her professional success by supporting the next generation of leaders in science and innovation. Rennisha, we thank you for that energy and support, a very valuable contribution. Paul Burgundy. Paul is an applications technology leader for Dow Packaging and Specialty Plastics Wire and Cable business in North America. Paul has experience in the power transmission and distribution, as well as telecommunications markets, focused on research and development of new insulations, jackets, conductive composites, and polymer modifier materials. Paul is active in a number of industry organizations, including the Insulated Conductors Committee, the Communications Cable and Connectivity Association, Fiber Broadband Association, technical committees, amongst several others. Paul has earned his doctorate in polymer science and engineering from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, USA, and has a bachelor's in chemical engineering from the University of Delaware. And last but not least, Lauren Boss. Lauren is the marketing manager for Dow. She has 9 years of experience in the polyethylene and specialty materials industry. Lauren focuses on North American wire and cable and pipe markets, and she brings unique insights related to infrastructure megatrends in the region. So again, we thank each of you and Dow for supporting today's webinar. And Paul, go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. So I trust you can see the slides okay.
Yep.
We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and everybody around the world this morning and share a little bit about our view on the future of obviously some sustainable solutions for enhanced connectivity. If we just look at kind of the agenda, what we do want to try and do is make this as interactive as possible with the abilities that we can within the Teams platform. So we will go through and provide some introductions for those that may not know about Dow and kind of our view on sustainability and some of the efforts that we have going on as a company, but also specifically within the wire and cable business area. We also will share a little bit about our market trends within North America and some of the investments that we see happening, which is really driving the need for these sustainable solutions and innovations. And we will take questions at the end. So as Dave mentioned, please do put questions into the chat. But at the same time, feel free to provide your insights as well as to what you're seeing. So again, try to make it as interactive as we can, and if as time allows, we would love to hear from you as well. So whether before or after, during or after, we can certainly have a conversation. So all of our contact information is here. So anything that we don't get to necessarily throughout the course of this, or if you have other questions, you can feel free to reach out to any one of us. So with that, I will turn it over to Lauren to start our discussion today. So Lauren.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Dave, for the introductions. I'm Lauren Boss, and I'm going to give you a little bit of just a background on Dow as a company and what we're doing across the world, and then we'll go into what the mega trends are for North America, and then after that we'll shift to more of the sustainability details. So to kick it off, who is Dow? If you're not familiar, our purpose is to use our material science expertise in collaboration with partners to deliver a sustainable future. A lot of our efforts around the world, although we're located in Midland, Michigan as our headquarters, we have global activities going on. And again, we're a material science provider. We're trying to innovate, be customer-centric and inclusive for more sustainable materials to drive best-in-class performance and culture where new ideas thrive. So we're always trying to look at what can we do better, how can we enhance the raw materials at the very beginning of the cycle to deliver what's needed, in those real world applications. So around the world, we have over 35,000 employees. We have 106 manufacturing sites today, and we operate in over 31 countries. That's where we're manufacturing products, but we also are selling to customers and working through value chains in a much larger reach than even that. So that's a little bit of background on Dow as a company. Paul, you can go ahead to the next slide. For a little more detail on our business that we're representing here today, we come from our packaging and specialty plastics business at Dow, which the large buckets, the four I would put it into, are flexible packaging. So think about food packaging, things along those lines. Rigid packaging, more like bottles and drums, could be lids. Consumer could be anything from materials that go to footwear and golf balls to medical and health applications. And then last but not least, infrastructure is where we group power and telecommunications, wire and cables, as well as things like pipe and roads, materials that could go into roads and paving. So it's a broad portfolio. We have many different products, and it allows us to have expertise across many technologies to be leveraged from one space to another. As you can imagine, the sustainability targets and recycling efforts going on from flexible packaging might be different than what's going on in the wire and cable space, but our learnings can be leveraged, and we have a broad global team focusing on finding the solutions to these large scale targets and issues. So we can really leverage those different technologies and broad portfolio to our advantages. So just wanted to help you understand what the breadth of portfolio we have is across these markets, even outside of power and telecom. Dow also has a long history of material innovation, and that's across the board, but more specifically to the wire and cable business, we have over 70 years of material science evolution. So we've been a global leader for power and telecom cables since 1950 when we started launching some of these products all the way to today. So you can just see a quick overview of some of the big step change technologies that we've brought over the years, and some of the recognition such as R&D 100 awards that we've received for our work in these different industries. So we're always looking for how do we make it better? How do we answer the questions that the industry needs? And that's why we're here today trying to start that conversation, especially around sustainability of, what can we do as a material science provider to continue to develop the products that are going to allow us all to meet the targets and the efficiencies that we want to be a part of in the future. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears to the North American market trends and how the investments in infrastructure are impacting these markets. So some of you might be familiar with a bill that passed in 2021. It's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and it has about $550 billion of new spending that's going to be revamping U.S. infrastructure, and especially calls out high points around transportation improvements, broadband improvements, and water infrastructure. The biggest line items of the entire bill are for electric and power. That's $73 billion going towards improvements there. And then the second largest is towards broadband with $65 billion of investments to be rolled out over the next 5 years. So these are huge investments from a federal level that have been, signed into law now. So these will be coming. This year was somewhat of a transition year where you could start applying at state and local levels to get grants for some of these different applications. I would say that we aren't expecting to see the largest impact to really start in the wire and cable markets until 2024, based on the grant rollouts. But again, that's something we'd like to discuss with the group later on, perhaps during the Q&A, and see how you're seeing some of these investments start to trickle down to your businesses as well. But overall, huge investments from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that will be accelerating both power and broadband. So broadband translating to the telecommunications area for strong growth in the coming years. So again, I wanted to call out a few more specific applications. With the infrastructure bill, we expect that to, over half of it, go towards accelerating wire and cable growth in North America to some degree. So of course, the broadband accelerations and power, but then there are also investments around airports and public transit, roads, electric buses, and electric vehicle infrastructure, which could all pull from this industry to need more growth, more replacement, and so on for these these specific applications. So it's going to be a very strong accelerator on top of what has already been a growth market in recent years for North America. So just wanted to bring some light to those specifics and areas that we think will see significant growth, in the next 5 years. So a few others that I wanted to mention outside of just the infrastructure bill are, in addition, there's also the North American CHIPS Act, which is putting 1.5 billion towards wireless telecom innovation. There's also the North American Climate Bill with 2.9 billion for power grid upgrades, and that's specific to things around wind and solar power. And those two bills together, the Climate Bill and the CHIPS Act, are both preferred made in America materials is the expectation. So as we continue to move forward, these government funded programs, which are trying to create a more sustainable future and a more connected future, are giving those advantages to North America and to the US. So we expect US and Canada to be very strong growth, but a few things here that play towards the US in particular, to continue upgrading our infrastructure and create those sustainable long-term solutions. So overall, for what we've presented here around the investments for North America and the mega trends that we see, it shows that we've had strong growth in recent years, and we only expect that to really continue very strong in the next 5 years, as well as we continue to make these upgrades to our infrastructure, our power systems, our telecommunication systems, and try to connect a greater portion of the country and of North America. And as these needs continue to grow, right, so do the needs of the materials and the whole value chain. So again, we're going to need the sustainable materials and solutions to be able to make this growth a reality and do it in the most efficient and sustainable way. So that's where we really look forward to connecting with this group here and sharing ideas of how do we get there and how do we get there in the best way. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Rennisha to talk a little bit more about our sustainability efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, I want to talk to you guys a little bit more broadly on the sustainability efforts across Dow in general, but first we can start off with a video that kind of just outlines some of the bigger goals that we have established as a company. Unfortunately, we don't have the we don't have the audio, but it was just beautiful music. So you guys just sing to yourselves while you watch. Okay, so in essence, Dow has significant sustainability targets that we've put in place. As the video outlined, we have a three-prong approach in order to have the impact that we're looking for. So the first is protecting the climate, and that really is around us trying to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. In 2030, we have aggressive plans in place to reduce the net annual carbon emissions by 5 million metric tons versus our 2020 baseline. And then again, by reducing our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, we plan again to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. There have been quite a bit of initiatives that we have announced or kind of engaged in order to help meet that goal. The first is really just taking a look at the current assets that we have and looking for ways in order to reduce the carbon footprint and the emissions. A lot of that is through modernization efforts. So there have been global efforts significantly in in Canada, let's say, for instance, we have announced that we plan to build the world's first net zero carbon emission ethylene cracker and derivatives unit. So that's a big undertaking, and that's something that we think will really help us to be able to achieve this goal in 2050. Other things that we've done is try to modernize existing units site by site. There's significant efforts, again, that have taken place in Europe to date and continue to be undergone in Louisiana and some of our other sites as well. So really trying to push to improve what we call our footprint and reduce our carbon emissions. Another aspect of us achieving this drive to sustainability is really to stop the waste, and that's so that Dow will stop the waste by enabling 1 million metric tons of plastics to be collected and reused or recycled through direct actions or partnerships. So that's something that's very important to us, and there are a lot of efforts around us really stopping the waste. The final prong of that is to close the loop, and that's really enabling 100% of Dow products sold into packaging applications to be either reusable or recyclable. And that really starts with having sustainability in mind when we're fundamentally designing products that are going into these markets, these applications across markets. So really, we want to protect our climate, stop waste, and close the loop by modernizing our assets, by reusing and recycling our products through partnerships, and by designing with sustainability in mind from the beginning. We have 5 pillars upon which we work to innovate and to develop products towards sustainability. I think the first thing is making sure we pick safe materials. I know Paul will talk a little bit about that as it relates to wire and cable. The other piece that I spoke about before is reducing the carbon emission. The other aspect is to utilize renewable feedstock. We have signed some partnerships and put some things in place for us to be able to utilize renewable feedstock in about 25% of our electricity to date. But moving forward with design of our products, we want to make sure that we exploit all options there as well. Other approaches include mechanical recycling and then also advanced recycling, which again, Paul will touch upon those things more specifically and our efforts in that space, so I'll allow him to do that. But we essentially have a 5-prong approach to being able to design for sustainability. Specifically towards our achieving carbon neutrality and reduction by 50% of CO2 by 2030, there are things that we're working on in both the power and in the telecommunication segment. Specifically, we're looking at, jacketing compounds and whether or not we're able to incorporate post-consumer recycle in those application spaces in order to drive for more circularity. Other areas, and Paul is actually going to be presenting a paper at IWCS in Rhode Island actually on this topic, so stay tuned for that. And if you guys participate, you'll be able to catch some details as it relates to that as well. Other than that, in our power segment, there have been new advancements with our HFDD 4201 product that really enables enhanced degassing and thereby helps us to reduce carbon emissions versus some of the traditional technology, enabling a lower cost total solution to make that happen. So that's by enabling production efficiencies, and also, again, reducing our carbon footprint, which is part of the goal. Specifically, Paul will talk a little bit more about the telecommunication segment and the efforts that we're having to drive to sustainability in that segment. So Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Rennisha. Yeah, so what I'll do is kind of take a step further. So those are a couple of examples where we are looking at new materials to address sustainability. And I think Dave actually put it pretty well in the beginning. I think we are still trying to define, everyone is still trying to define what sustainability looks like for each respective company or person or individual groups, because it is such a broad topic. And I think there's many ways that we have to all work together, and it does really depend on industries and applications. And so from Dow's standpoint, looking at, packaging is obviously single use, and that's what you see in the news every day. But on the other side of it, we are in these durable applications and things that are um, really driving and enabling a lot of things within the infrastructure space. So how can we really utilize efficiencies, reliabilities, design new materials, and help improve from a sustainability aspect, and kind of look at it a different way versus strictly, I'd say strictly recycling, or the things that again most people think of when it comes to packaging type materials. So you saw a couple of examples of some new products, and so I'll take it a step further and kind of talk a little bit about things that we're thinking about from in this case, both a power and telecom standpoint, but also I'll focus a little bit more on fiber as an example, since that is one of the largest growing segments right now for obvious reasons. And so when we look at areas or applications within the space that we can look for sustainable opportunities to provide both that reliability, that efficiency, and things that overall lower carbon footprint and improve the environmental impact. We think about things like data centers, right? How can we, as Dow, as a material supplier, play into that space and help then downstream deliver on sustainable solutions? So, for example, Rennisha showed some of the pillars and ways that we think safer materials, right? So looking at halogen-free flame retardants versus some of the more traditional materials that are used, and looking across the global standards, right? So from an application standpoint, technically, how do we get these materials to meet the global needs, but at the same time provide safe material with low smoke, no halogens, right? Provide a safer environment for people as well as, in this case, equipment. Looking at low loss, high efficiency materials to actually power that data center, right? So some of our low loss insulation, right? Leading materials for the power cable segment. In combination, you really need both. You don't get one without the other, right? And so we're trying to look holistically and provide these different aspects of improvements to ultimately drive that sustainable approach. Things like access networks, right? So one of the largest contributors of carbon footprint, at least that I've seen in some external literature and sources, is that actually installation costs installations in general can be one of the largest contributors to CO2 emissions. And so how do we develop material solutions that can be installed faster, more efficiently, and ultimately lead to lower carbon footprint, whether it's Dow's or collectively? Making cables smaller, lighter, easier to handle, faster to install, I'd say minimally invasive. And I know there's a lot of work in that space across everybody that has joined in this call today. And then another aspect, right, is submarine cables, right? We want these cables to be efficient and have very good longevity, because obviously we don't want to have to pull these cables out of the ocean or have to repair them. And so we're really looking for high quality, clean installations, protection where needed, but thinking about sustainability in a way that we provide that longevity, that durability, that also, in a way is a sustainable solution, right? And so I think across the board, There's different ways to think about it. And again, I think from our standpoint, we'd love to hear about how you're tackling these challenges. So as I just mentioned, right, we're looking at these materials, and from one aspect of sustainability is the longevity, the reliability, and the efficiency. And so whether we look at power cables, across the material range, looking at ways that we can provide property enhancements or performance benefits to allow for these cables to last longer and transmit electricity more efficiently to power not only homes, but data centers and other ways that we have our interconnected network, right? Again, I think everything is becoming more intertwined and going hand in hand, where you need one as well as the other from a power and communication standpoint. From telecommunications, you just saw kind of how we're driving our Acceleron type products to not only provide this efficiency and reliability, but look at ways that we can improve not only installation efficiencies, but also manufacturing efficiencies. And from a fire performance, really leveraging a lot of our technology to be able to provide that low smoke and toxicity, look at safer materials, where we not only balance the properties of what's needed for the applications, but keeping the sustainability in mind, and how we can choose materials that are not only sustainable, but also, there's a lot of things right now around substances of concern and a lot of scrutiny on a lot of different materials. So keeping that at the forefront and making sure across the chain we're all mindful of those opportunities that we have to provide more sustainable solutions. So the last thing I'll talk about is kind of the mechanical recycling aspect, and Rennisha kind of pointed at it earlier. So we will highlight a little bit more on the technical front and in our paper in Rhode Island. And so one of the first areas that Dow has progressed further along in is mechanical recycling. So Rennisha mentioned advanced recycling, right? That's basically taking materials and bringing them back to the ethylene building block and repolymerizing. And Dow has signed a number of agreements, and we are working on ways that we can utilize that. Those are going to be little bit longer term opportunities and things that are getting kicked off that will eventually become to fruition and have material. But right now, today, we're really focused on from a wire and cable standpoint, and kind of that packaging as a whole is in part this mechanical recycling, because there is a lot of material, there is material available, and there's applications and things that you see in everyday use now, where there's a highlight on post-consumer recycled material being reused. And it's not just, obviously not just wire and cable, but a lot of applications. So we do have options for mechanical recycling in wire and cable, we feel, and we've been able to do some work. And I know across, probably across the audience, there's a lot of discussion as to how this may be applicable to wire and cable, and what applications and areas that we can look at this. But there's a couple things, right? We can look at formulating compounds with recycled content. It could be for jackets. It could be for other components within the cable material, cable designs themselves. We're really looking at where can we incorporate this? How much value does this bring to either you or an end user or across the value chain? And what kind of trade-offs can we have, right? So there may be some trade-offs that we have to design in when we come up with new products. We can look at post-consumer or post-industrial materials and utilize different aspects of the Dow toolbox that Lauren showed, right? So whether it's looking at high performance resins or materials that can be then paired with post-consumer products to improve their properties, compatibilizers, ways to put together ultimately the lowest total cost, highest value solution for the market. These are kind of the things that we have started to look at from a wire and cable standpoint, particularly in the jacket space. So this is kind of the commercial for Rhode Island, and we will be sharing some of our technical data associated with looking at the mechanical recycling PCR in jackets. But we'd love to hear from you how you're thinking about this. Is this something of interest in the sense that, does this bring some value to the industry as far as moving the needle on sustainability, right? And I think it's all about us working together to really drive this circular economy. And while we traditionally design for longevity, there's and durable goods that are meant to last, I think there's also opportunity to work together to find new ways to innovate across the board in a lot of different fashions. So with that, we will open it up for Q&A, and I'll turn it back to Dave.
Excellent. Again, I want to thank each of you for just some excellent perspectives that we all need. And I guess one initial question that I have is, obviously different materials require different processing or technology to recycle and improve their sustainability capability. Is it easy to identify which materials have a better scenario for either carbon footprint or different evolutions of life cycle dissipation, if you know what I mean, in terms of environmental sense? I mean, how do we assess whether one product is better than another for a particular application?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it ultimately depends. Yeah, it really depends on the products, the cables, the materials. I think all of it. We are in the process of looking at various scenarios for life cycle analysis. I think in general the materials tend to contribute a fraction of some of the other components, particularly things like metals. So I think it's a case by case basis, but what we're trying to do, right, is design the materials with that in mind from the get-go. So Rennisha had pointed out the D4201. So that's meant for a high and extra high voltage type of transmission application, but we're already designing it to have basically lower carbon footprint. Just from the material design, kind of looking at that versus traditional materials. But then when you really get into the whole system or the cables, yeah, there are, it's kind of all the different components have to get rolled together.
Right. Again, I want to invite everyone in the audience to post your questions to the panel here in the chat function if you've not already. So please take a moment to add some questions. Sort of a subsequent question. When we're looking at carbon footprint, and again, we can talk about the life cycle of, say, a cable as an example, where you have a cable that is probably in service for 40 or 50 years or somewhere in the infrastructure, and then you can recycle those materials, kind of take out the copper, take out the different components and find ways to reutilize those materials. But when we're looking at carbon footprint, is that really more about the manufacture of the original molecule, the original material? And again, it's how do how do you look at, say, a polyolefin based material or a vinyl based material or a fluoropolymer based material? How does that impact, significantly different, if any, in carbon footprint or emissions?
Can I make a comment here, Paul, before maybe you
Yeah, go
make
ahead.
some?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and I hope I'll be addressing at least portion of your question, then I'll use Paul as my backup to give you all the better insights. But I'd say this, I think that designing with sustainability in mind is more than just, putting the carbons and hydrogens together, right? It's more than just the starting material. It's really taking a look at the process that you utilize to generate these monomers, to produce these polymers, and really trying to build efficiencies in that. It's taking a look at your logistical process, how you're moving things around internally within your asset space, how you're going to move things around from yourself to that customer base, whether or not you're choosing materials that are more compatible with each other so that will make it easier for you to utilize that material as a starting point to reuse and utilize in a secondary application, for instance. So I think it's really looking across all of that. And of course, we know that that's what the life cycle analysis takes into consideration. But like Paul said, I think sometimes the polymers make up a smaller subset of that. That doesn't mean that we don't have our role to play in that. But I think as we think through things, we have to ask ourselves, is this the right material that's going to give better performance, more long lasting, more efficiency, and addressing those performance based questions, but then also how is our customer going to use it? How can we make it more efficient for them to use it in their process? Because all of these utilization of energy, I think that kind of adds up, right? And that's how in the end you have a solution that's I think more overall sustainable. We talk about sustainability in the sense of the product, but it's more the entire from beginning to end manufacture and getting to the customer, and then how you reclaim that and utilize it, that really matters in the conversation. So we're taking a look at all of those pieces, and that's kind of why I talked about Dow's broader goals around sustainability and around its kind of improving or reducing the carbon emissions for assets and modernizing those pieces of equipment, et cetera, because all of that plays a role in developing a solution that we bring to the customer that we could truly quantify as being more sustainable. Sorry, Paul. Now you can go give it a better answer.
Actually, Rennisha, that
You
was
gave a good answer.
I'm sorry, Rennisha, that was an excellent response, and it does make sense. And I guess just to kind of think through what you were saying is, when we're looking at energy consumption or water consumption or any of the components of the process, it's not only at the original materials and the ingredients to those materials process, it's also the extrusion process, it's also, the actual finished product manufacture. It's every step has those same parameters to measure. And so it's not just, one sliver of the supply chain, it's all steps of the supply chain. Sorry, Paul, I just thought that was fascinating, though. A good perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, it's all the way from, the power that we use to make a material, to the installation, to the transportation. I mean, it all plays a role in that overall number. And I think that's the mindset, right? It's just starting to start thinking about it in that way, because sometimes we do get focused on what we can control, or where, from my side, okay, a technical standpoint, I may be looking at a product, but really, okay, you got a supply chain aspect. You've got then, customers going to use it, burn energy. So you got to kind of, in the end, it's that circularity, that mindset that I think we all need to kind of think about.
Yeah, and more so while we can't do it in of ourselves. That's why when Paul started and said, talk to us as well about, some of the approaches that you may be taking, or some of the areas where you think that you we could work together to create a solution, because it's not like a one-prong approach, right? I think it's definitely something that has to be taken from a collaborative stance. Like, would you be willing to incorporate PCR, and what does that mean? Because to be frank, that comes with a cost. So what are you hearing from your customers about the importance of, sustainability? What are they asking for? What are they willing to pay for? Kind of understanding some of those pieces helps us to put the puzzle together in a way that everybody can benefit, I would say.
Certainly, the entire supply chain needs to work together to really have a true impact on all of this, and it's hopefully more than just targeting one material. It's really all the materials. When we're talking about safety and performance and environmental sustainability. I mean, it all kind of works together. A couple questions from the group here. Can you elaborate on the grades that are specifically designed for sustainability in each of your 3 product lines? I mean, is there something that is more pronounced for sustainability?
Yeah, I think we could probably follow up with specifics, but I think, that, like I shared, right, I think things like halogen-free materials, they're things that we would view from our standpoint as, okay, a safer material, let's say. We did highlight the D4201, right? Some new insulations where we're coming out with these with that in mind, as far as, you saw reduction in carbon footprint kind of from that material standpoint. We have to translate that across, as we just said, but those are a couple of examples where, these are, let's say, they're newer with those things in mind, and we continue to develop. And as I said, I think everybody has a different perspective too. So, while we might have one perspective, we, collectively need to kind of say, okay, well, what is of value to everyone or others as well. So, yeah, we can follow up afterwards too. Feel free to send us some note.
And I think you do have that one example from the nomination or the finalist for the R&D 100, right, Paul? I think maybe that might align as well. So maybe you could share some of that offline.
Yep, absolutely.
Very good. Can you expand on the criteria that is used to design solutions with sustainability in mind? That's a great question, because there are all sorts of criteria, I guess, that we could look at, and sometimes they're defined by something close to our industry or materials, and sometimes they're defined for other applications. So what criteria would Dow look at to design solutions for sustainability?
Yeah,
go ahead,
sorry,
Rennisha.
Paul.
Yeah,
I was going to comment on, I don't know that it's specific to the wire and cable space, but I think first we try to find areas where we think about recyclability, for instance. That's something that we think about. Well, okay, first we think about energy. So how well does it fit into our assets and into our wheelhouse and manufacturing? So I think that's kind of some of the first steps. The other piece that we think about is, how does this fit into the structure that you're putting together? Like, I think it's more easily explained when you think about packaging. A lot of things are multi-layer films or multi-layer applications. Are you using compatible products that would be able to be utilized, let's say, for example, in the same type of recycle stream? I think those are things like compatibility is something that we look at as well. We think about whether or not we need that extra piece or that extra part. Is that something that you could, like, this is, again, I think I'm thinking more from a packaging standpoint, so maybe not the best answer for wire and cable, to be frank. But is there a one-piece unit for an application versus having multiple pieces? Because even if you think about things like water bottles, it's easier to recycle the water bottle with the cap on top of it, let's say, for instance, right? So are you looking at things that have compatibility, and are you minimizing some of the some miniaturization that might impact ability to recycle? We think about some things like that. We think about lightweighting. Lightweighting is a great way to address, emissions and things like that. Does it give us an opportunity? Are we making tougher materials that allow us to lightweight our solutions, which thereby impact our sustainability from the first prong of reducing emissions? I think we think about things like that, and then we put constraints on it at the back end. Do we believe that these parameters or these inputs will allow us to still meet the targeted performance, right? I mean, that's the basis of, we develop these things to say, does it fit in our manufacturing? Would it be recyclable? Would it allow us to lightweight? Would it allow us to have maybe more logistical things that make sense for us? All of these pieces, and does it meet the target specifications that we have for the application? Is it going to be long lasting, right? I think those types of parameters are kind of what we think about, and then we put cost on top of that to figure out, is that something that we are able to bring to the market sustainably and long term? That's how I think about it. I know maybe it wasn't the best example for wire and cable, but I hope that gives you a sense or an idea. I don't know if Lauren or Paul have anything to add on that.
I mean, what I would add is I think we continue to evolve the criteria as we, as everything evolves, right? And I think traditionally we think about efficiency, reliability, and longevity. Again, kind of we think durable versus single use packaging, right? So most of our industry is durable. So that's kind of traditionally what we design for is efficiency. As I mentioned, though, things like installation, right? We want to help design products that then ultimately help downstream to install the products more efficiently. Because I do think that that's a key aspect. We are thinking, about ways that, as we talked about, can we use some recycled content, reclaim maybe those products and start introducing them in? Are there ways that we collectively can utilize these materials in other ways other than, let's say, putting it back into the cable? Maybe it is other parts or things, right, that we actually take some recycled content and move it somewhere. So I think the criteria is somewhat evolving, but traditionally it's been around those properties or targets to address it. And I think they still hold, but I think we're also trying to look at new ways that we can think about it.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is again on safety, which goes through the whole chain. Is it a safe, environmental, and people working with this material in the beginning and throughout the chain, and that goes to the ease of install and all of those things. We're thinking about the environmental health and safety as well aspect, and then really just the whole life cycle of the product, as we've mentioned before. Is it going to be long lasting? Is the energy we put in to make it and all the different steps going to pay off for how long it lasts? So those are the big things for the wire and cable side.
Yeah, and it's an engineering balance between safety, environmental impact, performance, and again, wire and cable is I hate to say it because we all love and are committed to the industry, but it is a small product. It's an afterthought. I mean, it's behind the walls. People really don't think about the cabling per se, but all that packaging, Rennisha, that you mentioned that takes, and all the logistics that move that product is important. Just a couple more questions we have time for. As part of Dow's future sustainability strategy, will this also encompass the packaging products? And I think we've touched on that, the packaging materials and process for shipping and logistics to reduce waste, or returnable packaging approach. I think you've pretty much addressed that, but that was the question.
Yeah, and I can give a quick example, and Rennisha, if you want to add anything on, I know we're running short on time. So we are always looking at that. What's the most efficient way for us to get our products out there and move them around throughout the chain. But we've even done pilot programs where we have plastic pallets, for example, that can be reused and recycled and brought back, and moving materials, the material handling side as well of how do we make that more efficient. As being a provider of some of those raw materials that go into packaging, right? So we're always looking at better ways to do that and getting more efficient. So that's definitely on our minds as well.
Right. And I'm going to combine these two questions because I think they are quite similar. Maybe Paul, this might be to you, but are the materials able, when you recycle products or even some percentage into your products, do they have similar electrical mechanical properties? And for example, will Unigard maintain the same flame retardancy once it is recycled and put in at some percentage into virgin materials?
Yeah, I think I would say come join us in Rhode Island. But I mean, the answer is right. So for just recycled product in general, if you talk about post-consumer pulling together different streams, the answer is no. That right, they will not have the same properties. They'll have kind of combination of properties based on whatever that recycled stream is. And so that's where we want to look at, can we utilize it, but also maintain then that balance. The recycling of, if you try to take the same material and reuse it, in general would be very similar. But again, you're going to have gone through some additional processing and things like that, ultimately would have to be evaluated. If you start blending it out and let's say thinning stuff out, if you're talking flame retardancy, obviously they won't maintain the same level as if they were new.
Right. And I guess our last question kind of addresses that is in cables, in some instances, could the safety and quality requirements and the recycling requirements don't really complement each other. I mean, they're kind of in conflict in a way. And again, whether you add 5% recycled content or 20% recycled content and maintain some sufficient properties, is that a calculation that could be done so you have sufficient properties once you add recycled content, or is the recycled content really going to go into other applications of lesser performance requirements?
I mean, I'll start and the others can chime in too. But I mean, in general, yes, they're going into, like I said, we've kind of been highlighting, right, that the most critical space today, or the most visible space today, is the packaging, where we want to, you really see it, right? It's very visible, and as you said, wire and cable is not so visible. I think the answer is, yeah, we're looking at ways that we can do that, and within the wire and cable space in the most effective way. They don't, they do go in opposite directions, and so how can we do that? And I think the best answer is probably partnership, right? So working together to decide what that balance is. How can we incorporate things like that into wire and cable?
Yes, I mean, again, it's a very complex balance of properties, but again, we need to have a better strategy for recycling and all sorts of impacts, but energy, water consumptions, packaging, reuse, all those things have to be part of the equation. And I want to thank Rennisha and Paul and Lauren for sharing those concepts with us. It's not an easy solution, but at the same time, as long as we can address each one, wiring cable, because any wiring cable has so many different materials, components, things that need to be separated and then recycled to some volume that makes it feasible and economic economically feasible. We've got to come up with ways to do that in commerce, across the country, across the globe, and that's again takes a lot of investment and thought. So again, thank you for this important topic, and please note the contact points shown on your screen should you wish to contact either Rennisha or Paul or Lauren after today's event. Each of these IWCS webinar series presentation events are recorded and will be archived on the IWCS.org website. Normally takes a week or so to have these posted for your review and listening again. Each of these IWCS, the IWCS webinar series will conduct technical paper presentations as well as these industry trend webinars and by sponsored companies. Our next scheduled technical paper presentation webinar event will be on November 18th, a Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern USA time. We typically operate and present those on the third Friday of each month, but clearly we have our IWCS webinar, IWCS Cable and Connectivity Industry Forum in Providence coming up in October. So we'll conduct our next webinar in November. So each of you will be receiving an announcement, and please feel free to share these announcements with your colleagues so that they can join the webinars as well. It's important that we all recognize and thank our IWCS partner sponsors, one of which is Dow, who has been tremendous both in terms of the content that Dow provides, such as this information, plus many other technical papers, but also financially to underwrite the IWCS forum. And so again, without their strong leadership and generosity, we would not be able to bring to you these important innovations and information to our global community. So thank you to these leading suppliers in our industry for your support. For over 70 years now, the IWCS Cable and Connectivity Industry Forum will now take place showcasing new technologies in cable and connectivity products, processes, and applications in Providence, Rhode Island. We will be live and in person on Monday through Thursday, October 10th through 13th, here in 2022 at the Rhode Island Convention Center in Providence, Rhode Island, USA. Please watch your inbox and your social media as long as visiting our website to gain valuable information on the exciting program that we've established. And we really hope to see you in Providence to see some incredible innovations, technical papers, as well as industry trends and activities. So please visit our website at IWCS.org for more event details. And again, we thank you for participating today, and we wish you a great weekend.